This podcast is brought to you by the United States Marine Corps.
What's happening, sports fans? Christian Pedersen, the now freshly decked out Coach DeMeo. You can honestly always give a nice plug for a school that shows up with these kind of jackets. That's definitely you're now the better dressed.
I think you're waiting on one of these.
Yeah, you're the better dressed too. I'm just waiting for my bosses to start realizing that the jacket from 3 years ago is now worn out and needs a new one. This was definitely a different shade of blue when this all started. Welcome to week 3 of the San Diego Laxcast, sponsored by the U.S. Marines. You ready to just jump right into it? This season, we are now past the awkward, we've only played 1 or 2 games phase. We're into the season now, and we've got sort of a picture of, lo and behold, some combo of Torrey and LCC and Coronado are all up in the tops. And You've now had a chance to look at both sides, guys and girls. You've played, and you've watched some really good games. So just before we get into, I got a couple specific teams I want to talk about, give some shout outs to, but just, Coach, anything that's kind of caught your eye this year so far?
Well, I think when you look at the typical top teams, I mean, it's like I mentioned last week, they're starting to beat some teams that historically, recently with those games with Coronado and Torrey over Sending Nations Prep, that's historically a nationally ranked team, and for those guys to win both games fairly dominantly, by 3 or 4 goals each one of them. That just says a statement about our top teams. And then the middle of the pack, we have just a lot of teams beating each other, and some teams running the table, and it's your typical March in San Diego.
Typical March in San Diego for some teams, but let's expand it, because like we said, we will always get to talk a ton about the open division schools, quote unquote, as we get closer and closer to the end of the season. But I want to talk about a couple of things. So you want to start guys or girls?
Start with the girls side.
Let's start with the girls side. First off, just want to give a shout out to Hoover. They are definitely one of the younger programs, only their second year as a varsity school, getting their first W of the season versus San Ysidro, another school that got their first program W even earlier in this season. So shout out to Coach Granfield. She's been there with them for both years now, and that can be tough, getting a program literally built up off the ground.
Yeah, it is. And if I remember the boys' side, we featured last year.
Yep, they got their first win also.
Side of show, and it was pretty fun to watch that. And I imagine the girls are in sort of a similar growth mode, and that's awesome when you see those beginning programs. And as someone who's been part of a startup program back east, you get over the humps, and then it's fun when the victories.
You take your lumps, but
you got to take your lumps. It makes the victories feel even better.
I was going to say it makes that all that much sweeter to finally get that win. One team though that is kind of maybe growing from a D1, they're pretty good too. I'm going to say they're almost becoming the team to beat this year on the girls' side is Scripps Ranch. Currently 4-0. They have wins over El Camino, Mission Hills, Del Norte, all blowouts. Then Poway, though, beating Poway by 3, only holding Poway to 4 goals. What do you make of a 4-0 Scripps Ranch?
Well, I mean, I had the chance to see them play when they played Coronado, and they were excellent. I think certainly improved from last year on the offensive side. They lost a great goalie last year.
Sam Fish was an amazing goalie.
She was amazing, and they have a good goalie this year. Their offensive players are extremely strong. They get some young talent, and they seemed really dialed in. They jumped out pretty big on Coronado. It might have been 11-3 at halftime, who, again, had just like them, in a close game with Poway. So I think Scripps is making a statement for being the team to beat. I'll be interested to see how they pair up with La Jolla and Torrey and those guys. But
obviously, it still has to run the gauntlet a little bit, and 4-0 is not necessarily. Maybe 7 or 8-0 is where you start to really go, okay, look out. But 4-0 is always fun to be. Hey, we're getting in early on the bandwagon.
Yeah, and it's all who you play. I think the first 3 games were blowouts. They played some middle of the pack teams, but then they go with wins over Poway and Coronado, and it's like, all right, like I guess they're making a case for that top 4 teams. So
Well, you want to talk about blowouts? I got a really interesting. Let me just read off some scores here for you. Let's talk about Granite Hills, 7-0 right now. The Eagles win 13-0, 16-6, 20-1, 18-5, 21-2, 16-3, 18-2. I know that's a lot of numbers, but the basic gist of what you have to take away is no game closer than 10. The closest was a 10-goal win over Carlsbad.
Yep.
Now, you could say what you want about, I'm sure you've been on both ends of those kind of wins, but for a team like Granite Hills jumping up from D2 last year to D1 this year, is that a sign of a successful transition?
it is. And again, I think, something that like Grossmont and Granite Hills have always struggled with is being sort of the class of those divisions out there. And you could see their close game was against Carlsbad, who's a North County team. And then they have Rancho Bernardo coming up, and that's a historically strong girls program. But yeah, I mean, it's if you're scoring, regardless who you're playing, if you're putting up 20 points a game, that means that
it starts to turn heads a little bit, right? Yeah, because that means that your twos are scoring, and even maybe your threes are in there getting some goals.
Absolutely.
So congratulations to Granite Hills. Our final girls team that I want to talk about, the Del Norte Nighthawks, currently sitting at 2-2, lose a close one to Cathedral, lose a big one to Scripps Ranch, but we've obviously already talked about Scripps Ranch Day. Then big blowout wins against Bishops and SFC. Bishops being the primary nugget in there that I kind of want to dig at because they've been an open division school for the last couple years, and Del Norte is a school that has kind of been a relative unknown in the lacrosse world. You got as much as you could handle of the guys program over the weekend, and they're one that's making that grade up. But does this sort of say to you, Del Norte, they get one huge blowout loss against the Scripps, but then they get a huge blowout win against a Bishops. Where do you see that falling?
Well, I think they're a growing program, a lot like the boys program at Del Norte, who we face this weekend. They're an upstart school all together, so it's like they're growing.
Leaves you a little scared though.
Last year, there's a lot of lacrosse going on out in that area, so it's like we talked about last week with youth programs. You see strong youth programs coming out of Del Norte, so I think it's only going to be a matter of time, kind of like San Marcos took the jump a few years back.
It's a great parallel.
Where these guys start to be a consistent powerhouse.
Let's jump over to the guys' side now, unload a 4-pack of teams. The Grossmont Foothillers sitting at 4-0 now. You talked about, literally when you said for the Granite Hills girls team, Granite/Grossmont is ... and they, big wins against Valhalla, Helix, El Cap, and Monta Vista. So, sure, again, not marquee wins, but first off, just in general, always a shout out to an undefeated team, always a shout out to a team showing offense. How do you make that stick, though? How do you translate those kind of wins into, hey, look, we deserve to be in the conversation in the D1 playoffs?
Yeah, and that's part of the strength of schedule. They have a big league, so they have to play all those teams. Both those programs do their best to schedule tougher teams when they can, and I think they have Valley Center coming up, which that's a team. I
switched away from the graphic for you. I'll switch back to it.
Playing some better teams, and so that'd be a good gauge of where they're at. And I tell you, as a coach, you can have a couple easy games to start, and you don't know where you were at as a program.
Yeah.
It's just until you go out and you get challenged and you face tough talent, you don't really know where you're at. So it'd be interesting when they start playing some of those teams.
Well, I think that's an interesting segue into our next team, the St. Augustine Saints, one of the newer programs, only in, I believe, their 3rd or 4th year as a program at their school, jumped up into Division I this year after a great showing in the D2 finals last year. They, sitting at 1-3, though, have done the complete opposite of that argument. They have losses to Rancho Bernardo, a win over Anderson, Texas, losses to Westview and San Marcos. So if you're on that flip side of the coin, how are you the coach saying, guys, look, I know that these have been tough losses, but we are fresh-faced into D1. We're going to be more than fine. Like, we're gonna hold our own come the playoffs. We just have to weather 5 or 6 tough L's to gauge where we're at compared to the quote-unquote big boys, the blue bloods, whatever you want to call it.
It's absolutely going to pay off for Coach Toller, and he's a Boston guy like myself, and I think he takes that attitude that they're not going to back down to anyone, and even as a new program, they're gonna be much better in the end. And we play them in a couple weeks, and I know they've faced better competition than us to date. So I think they're going to be prepared for that. And they're 1-3. That record's deceiving. They beat a good Texas team that we ended up playing the next day and lost to an overtime. And those guys handle them pretty well. So Saints, that tough schedule early on is going to pay off.
Well, and that seems to be that there are definitely two very divergent routes of how to grow your team and how to grow your people's understanding and enthusiasm for the game of either let's just get the wins and let's build some confidence, or let's get a gallon full of realism and judge as to where we are. Let's continue just kind of a shout out, because I want to talk about some of these schools right now that are doing really well that we might not get a chance to. The Valhalla Norseman program we didn't even get to last year. Way out there in borderline Arizona, basically, compared to the coastal and North County heavy conversation of it. Wins versus Mar Vista, Santana, Chula Vista, Helix, and Mira Mesa have them currently sitting at 5-2. Doesn't have to be a ton of like, oh my goodness, this is such this, that, or the other lacrosse, but just always good to see a new program entering into the conversation of, hey, look, we're going to be a mix in the playoffs this year. They'll be down in D2, but you always see some new team rising for their first shot at a playoff run.
Yeah, and what's great about that league in general is they do keep adding teams, and there are a lot of upstart programs. So although they got to face the Granite Hills and the Grossmonts and they take their lumps, there's plenty of games they have a chance in. So that is pretty cool.
Another team that I want to give a first season type shout out for is California. I'm sorry, you try to read something out of the corner of your eye and you say CA Division 2. That's not the team. That's their division. Point Loma, the Pointers, sitting at 5-1. Another team that's got kind of the same as we talked about Granite Hills girls, of huge margins of victory that will serve them very well in terms of the Lax Power rankings and how they set themselves up for potentially, if they drop one or two down the stretch, they have a little bit of built-in leeway. You know, congratulations to the Pointers and scoring the 20s and the 15s. That's always exciting to see. But Coach, I'll just kind of end our conversation on this note. We've now talked about a lot of teams that are running up scores, and then a lot of teams that are losing tight ones. If you're playing, you know, I know that you are actually a coach and you are right on that open. You've been in open, you've been in D1, you've been in both. So you don't have to entirely tip your hand if you don't feel comfortable with this. But if you're playing that master game of trying to really get the best out of your season and the best out of your kids, are you using every single game as an opportunity to get that 10-point margin? Or are you trying to say, hey, look, we're up, let's get our other kids some work? We're down, it doesn't matter how far down we go, we got to try and just commit to learning that one defense. Or like just kind of unpack. I know that's kind of a loaded multi-part question, but unpack it.
Exactly what you're saying, and those are the type of things. I mean, you're always trying to win the game, and you want to win it. You know, it's nice to win the game by 10, but I think what you're finding is you need depth on any team, not just at Santa Fe Christian. I mean, you got to have depth, and I know here we have to have more depth. So when you can get a comfortable lead and you get the game in hand, and you can play kids that may not be in a tight game, and even better, give them a better high school experience that they get on the field, and that makes a lot more sense to me than, you know, being up by 6 in the fourth quarter and trying to make it 10. I just think when you have the opportunity to get kids on the field, you get them on the field, and it's important for them to feel like they're part of the team. And if you don't have a lot of those games, you got to take advantage of the times you do. So
you'll take the long-term investment versus the short-term, you know, pretty penny of, oh, we blew those guys out, let's move on to the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's important, and if in the end it costs you a spot in the seeds, then it costs you a spot in the seeds. But if it gives the kids more opportunity to feel like they're part of the team and get on the field and a varsity game, then that makes sense too. So every situation's different. But I think it makes sense. You know, you get the win, you get the hand and lead, and then you start to develop, your bench talent.
Well, that's your weekly tip from a CIF champion. What do you call the Boston high schools? What's the CIF equivalent?
They call it EMAS.
So he's an EMAS champ. He's a college coach. He's a CIF champ. He's a whole lot of everything. Soak up some of that knowledge. That's your general attempt at shouting out and sounding like I have some sort of knowledge. Coach, what do you got on tap for SFC this week?
We got Rancho Bernardo tomorrow night.
There you go.
Which has been a great game the past 2 or 3 years we've played. It's always been close. And then later on in the week we have Eastlake. So
a pair of things.
Nate McPeak, East Lake.
I'm actually going to go check them out versus Westview tonight.
Okay.
And then also I saw RB versus Canyon Crest. So shout out to the Broncos on that dub. That'll do it for our Laxcast. As always, please tweet us clips and information on people that we need to be knowing about. We're always trying to grow the game. And thank you very much to the Marines for sponsoring this and making this all possible. Coach, see you in a little bit. I'll see you in a week.
week.
All right.